Nuclear activity in the Arctic region of Russia has been going on for over 70 years. More than 100 nuclear explosions were conducted here, and more than 100 nuclear-powered submarines, military ships, and civilian vessels were built, operated, and decommissioned here. Several nuclear power plants, dozens of military bases, and other facilities with radioactive materials were built and still operated here. And of course, there were a lot of radiation accidents. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, most of these facilities were left in a very dangerous state, forming the so-called nuclear legacy. History shows that when a major nuclear state collapses due to economic problems and military expenses, it creates significant risks for everyone around it. We know it from the past, but we may face this again in the future when the Putin's regime collapses, sooner or later. Bellona has been actively involved in solving nuclear legacy problems for about 30 years. Firstly, simply drawing attention to them, and then actively promoting international assistance in eliminating them. But the good news is that many of the nuclear legacy problems have been solved, including with foreign assistance in the form of technology and finance. European countries, including Norway, have spent about 2.5 billion euros to address these problems. Among the resolved problems, we can name Saida Bay, where reactor compartments of nuclear submarines are securely stored, more than 120 compartments. And service ship Lepse, a floating storage facility for spent nuclear fuel, which was finally disposed of last year. A partially solved problem is Andreeva Bay. This is a storage site for more than 20,000 spent fuel assemblies of the Northern Fleet, just 40 kilometers from the Norwegian border. The base was brought to a safe state, and since 2016, a half of the fuel has already been removed from here, but the second half, more complex and more dangerous, remains. The problem of sunken objects is no less important than Andreeva Bay. There are about 10 nuclear reactors at the bottom of the Arctic seas. The most dangerous are the sunken submarines K-27 and K-159. The issue of raising them was discussed until 2022 between Russia and foreign partners. However, it is unlikely that Russia will be able to raise them alone, both to the lack of necessary technologies and money, and maybe it's more important because this is not a priority for Russia today. Russia's main focus now is confront to the West. Most of the nuclear legacy comes from past military programs, but nuclear militarization of the Arctic is still ongoing. By early 2025, the Russian Northern Fleet has around 25 nuclear ships and submarines. The Russian Navy remains the main operator of nuclear installations in the Russian Arctic. It operates about 40 nuclear reactors, in comparison with 25 in civilian programs. And no less important is that they have about 300 nuclear warheads on combat duty on their strategic submarines. In recent decades, Russia has built over 10 new nuclear submarines, one of them you can see on this slide, and is developing new nuclear weapon carriers. Russia spent more than $10 billion every year for modernization of its nuclear arsenals. This will create a new nuclear legacy in the future and poses risk of accidents during testing and operation already today. Here are some of the biggest accidents with nuclear facilities in the Arctic over the last 25 years. One example is a well-known tragedy of the Kursk submarine, which sank during Putin's first year as president. Another well-known example is a more recent accident during the testing of new weapons. In 2019, there was an accident with a nuclear reactor for the Burevestnik cruise missile. This caused a radiation release in the Arkhangelsk region and the death of 5 Rosatom's engineers and scientists. Now these tests have been moved to another site in the Arctic, to Novaya Zemlya. Speaking of Novaya Zemlya, this test site has seen over 130 nuclear explosions. Fortunately, no full-scale nuclear tests have been conducted here since 1990. However, the site has never been closed and is deliberately kept ready for use. This is a part of Putin's strategy to intimidate the West. In recent years, he has taken a lot of steps toward nuclear escalation. Last year, Russia withdrew its ratification of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And in a year, the New START treaty between the United States and Russia will expire. This means that likely next year, we don't know what will be between Trump and Putin, but likely next year, for the first time in decades, we will find ourselves in a situation where there are no treaties between the two largest nuclear powers limiting their nuclear arsenals. Potentially, this will allow Russia very fast to place up to 100 additional warheads on existing submarines in the Arctic. Unfortunately, if the nuclear escalation continues, then in a few years we may well see the resumption of nuclear testing at the Novaya Zemlya, the very activity that Bellona opposed 35 years ago. In addition to military activities, Russia is also developing civilian nuclear projects in the Arctic. They are closely connected with the extractive industrial project in this region, which Ksenia has already spoken about. The main example of civilian use of nuclear technologies in the Arctic is nuclear icebreakers. They have been used on the Northern Sea route for 65 years. Today, there are 8 nuclear icebreakers working here. There is more than in Soviet times. Half of these icebreakers are new and were commissioned in the last 5 years. And Russia plans to build 4 more. But in recent years, these plans have faced problems. First, the war in Ukraine has caused a breakdown in industrial cooperation with many European countries and Ukraine itself. Second, there is less governmental funding for building icebreakers. And third, the region's economic development, which needs icebreakers, is lower than expected. Sigurd already mentioned it. Last year, the plan was to transport 80 million tons of cargo along the Northern Sea route. But in reality, it was only half that amount. Russia is also broadly uses nuclear energy in the Arctic. Out of 11 nuclear power plants in Russia, 3 are located in this region, in Arctic. 2 of them, Kola and Bilibino, have been working for more than 50 years. In the future, Russia plans to build 5 new nuclear power plants in the Arctic with a total number of reactors of up to 16. Both in Soviet times and today, Russia chosen the Arctic for special nuclear installation due to its extreme specific conditions. Currently, Rosatom, the Russian nuclear corporation, is planning to build new reactor types in the Arctic, unlike anything built elsewhere in Russia. These technologies are being tested here with the goal of future export. Because we may classify most of these projects as small modular reactors, which is a new direction in nuclear energy development that many countries are currently interested in, even Norway. Most of these reactors in Russia are intended to power industrial projects in remote areas. However, the success of these projects depends on the export of extracted resources. With sanctions on Russia, it's unlikely that all of these projects will be completed. So let me conclude my speech with by repeating the key points. First, nuclear legacy issues are still dangerous and unresolved. In the current situation, nuclear cleanup projects may slow down or stop indefinitely. Second, new risks arise from ongoing nuclear militarization of the Arctic. Third, The lack of reliable information from Russia makes these problems even worse and harder to respond to. Bellona is working to address this by publishing analytical materials and monitoring the situation in the Russian Arctic and in Russian nuclear industry. And I recommend you to subscribe to our Arctic and Nuclear Digest. And last but not least, I can repeat what Ksenia already mentioned at this point. Sanctions and pressure on Russia are slowing its Arctic projects. So Russian Arctic natural resources should be banned on the international markets, both for environmental reasons and to limit Russia's capacity to continue its war against Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Dmitry.